There is a specific kind of personality that people encounter once or twice and never quite forget. Not because it was loud, not because it demanded anything, but because of the way it changed a room simply by being present. Here are 8 signs you have it. Sign number 1. You asked a colleague a perfectly ordinary question and watched them spend the next 2 minutes defending decisions you never challenged. You weren't skeptical, you weren't being critical, but something about the way you asked it made them feel examined, and they started building a case before you asked for one. Psychologist Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley found that people start explaining themselves around anyone they sense carries quiet authority, someone still, direct, and impossible to perform for. It's not something they decide. Their brain made a judgment about you before the conversation even started, and by the time you finished your question, they were already responding to that impression of you, not to what you actually asked. Sign number 2. Most people treat silence the way they treat a fire alarm. Something has gone wrong and it needs to stop immediately. The moment a conversation pauses, they start talking, not because they have something real to say, but because quiet makes them anxious in a way they can't fully explain. Research from the University of Groningen found that just 4 seconds of unexpected silence creates a genuine spike of unease in most people, and they fill it reflexively just to make the feeling stop. You don't feel that. A pause is just where thinking happens, but to the person across from you, your comfortable silence reads like a verdict that hasn't arrived yet. You're sitting there completely at ease, possibly thinking about something entirely unrelated to the conversation, while they're quietly replaying everything they've said in the last 5 minutes. Sign number 3. You asked someone a question, genuinely just wanted to know, and watched their answer become more personal and more honest than they'd planned for a conversation that started this casually. You had no idea it would land that way. You were just curious. Real curiosity is rarer than most people realize, and when someone encounters it unexpectedly, it can feel surprisingly exposing, like being genuinely paid attention by someone who wasn't even trying to examine them. Research on how deeply engaged people communicate shows they ask from a place of actual attention rather than social habit. Being half-heard leaves you in control of what you reveal. Being fully listened to removes that control in a way most people weren't prepared for. Sign number 4. At some point, someone told you something they clearly didn't mean to say. You know the moment. Right after it comes out, something flickers across their face, and you can almost see them thinking, "Why did I just say that?" It wasn't deep trust. It happened in an ordinary conversation, and it caught both of you off guard. When someone reads as genuinely attentive and non-reactive, people feel an unusual permission to be more honest than they planned for a conversation that started this casually. Your stillness removes the fear of judgment, of the story going somewhere it shouldn't, so they go further than they meant to, and then they feel exposed, and quietly, you become the person they're a little more careful around, not because of anything you said, but because of what they gave you without realizing it. Sign number 5. You declined something recently, clearly, calmly, without an apology wrapped around it, and felt the other person's pause. Not because you were harsh, just because your answer had a completeness to it they weren't expecting, like a door that's simply closed instead of being left open for negotiation. Dr. Henry Cloud, in his research on personal limits, found that people who decline clearly, without layering their answer in justification, are almost universally described by others as intimidating, even when being entirely respectful. Most people spend their whole lives making their no feel smaller and more negotiable to keep others comfortable. When yours arrives without the usual softening attached, the clarity itself is enough to unsettle someone who has never encountered a limit that wasn't open for discussion. Sign number 6. Think about the last time something went wrong around you. A tense moment, a conflict, and everyone reacted except you. Not because you didn't feel it, but because going still is what happens when you're taking something in before you let it show. And to everyone watching, that stillness read as not caring at all. Research consistently finds that feeling something and showing something are entirely different things. People who process quietly before they express tend to carry just as much emotionally as those who react immediately, sometimes more. But most people use visible, immediate emotion as a signal that they're readable and safe to be around. When you don't send that signal, people fill in what they can't see, and what they fill it in with is almost never an accurate picture of what's actually happening. Sign number 7. Someone tried to get you to self-correct recently. A subtle comment, a moment where the group expected you to fold, and you simply didn't. Not to be difficult, not to make a point, the pressure just didn't work the way they expected, and you could feel the moment they realized it wasn't going to. Psychologist Julian Rotter at Ohio State found across decades of research that people driven by their own internal direction rather than the approval of the room are consistently rated as more intimidating by others. When someone can't be moved by social pressure, they remove the most common tool people use to manage each other. And when that tool doesn't work, most people don't stop to understand why. They just decide you're difficult. That reaction says everything about them and nothing about you. Sign number 8. And this one reframes everything that came before it. All of it. The calm, the silence, the way a room shifts when you walk in. Most people read that as someone who simply feels less, and the truth tends to be almost exactly the opposite. Dr. Elaine Aron at Stony Brook University spent decades studying a group that makes up roughly 1 in 5 people, individuals whose nervous systems process the world at a greater depth than average, absorbing the emotional weight of a room before they can explain why. These are consistently the people others describe as having a powerful, unreadable presence, not because they feel less than those around them, but because they feel far more than they ever show. That composure was never emptiness. It was the discipline of someone who carries everything and learned to hold it carefully. People spent years calling you hard to read, saying you were too much, trying to put a name on something they could never quite understand. What they were reacting to was never distance, it was depth. And depth, to people who have never been on the inside of it, always looks like a wall. If this video finally gave language to something you've been carrying for a long time, subscribe. This channel is built for exactly this kind of conversation. And if someone in your life carries this kind of presence, send this to them.